Hi, so Titanforging. Some people like it, some people hate it. Ironically, the people that hate it the most are the ones that would get the most benefit or drawback from being a beneficiary or really unlucky with their Titanforging. But why is it in the game? Why do we have it? A lot of people would just love it if it disappeared completely. But what I'm going to do is take you back through a little potted history of how gearing has worked, especially from raids, but what we'd call the premier content. And we'll try and work out why it exists in the game, along with what Blizzard said they wanted of it as well, which of course it achieves its goal, which is why I think we're going to see this for a little while to come with, unless they can think of something different. So back in vanilla, for example, the first tier raid you would have done is likely to have been Molten Core. So you killed your first boss, Lucifron, and fantastic, it drops a few epics. Lovely. This was at a time when epics are epics. The purples. But it only dropped a few, like 3. Some bosses dropped 4, some dropped 3. If it was a tier boss, it'd drop a couple of pieces of tier. Now, it wasn't tier tokens, it was tier gear for the first couple of raids anyway. Changed to tokens after that in vanilla. Which meant, for example, you'd be 2 pieces of tier drop. That means 2 people in your raid could get it if they had to be the right class as well. So it was much more difficult to apportion it to the people you really wanted to give it to, because they had to belong to that class. And of course it was for 40 people. Now, the thing is, like, if you compare Mythic raiding, which is the hardest mode of raiding, to then, which was the only mode of raiding, you got twice as many people back in vanilla, but the same number, sometimes fewer items dropping than drop in Mythic, but for twice as many people. So straight away it's going to take you at least twice as long to gear up. But in reality it took longer than twice as long to gear up to at least get what you would be even approaching BIS, because, as I say, those tier items. I remember our first kill of Chromagus, which was the penultimate boss in Blackwing Lair, drops the shoulders. Now, I was all about the Judgment set. The Judgment set was fantastic at the time. Wanted that. Now, I'd got most of it. The chest was dropped off the final boss, so we couldn't get that yet. But the shoulder, you could cover up the fact that you didn't have the chest with a tabard. Shoulders are very distinctive. You can't really do a lot about that. So what I did is I absolutely prayed. I killed lots of gnomes, made sure they all died, so that when we first killed Chromagus, Judgment shoulders would drop. And they did. I seem to remember some cruel trick of the gods that it also drops the mage shoulders, which went to some snotty gnome. But never mind that. But I got my Judgment shoulders. Now, anyone else in the raid, obviously the other paladins, well, they were just behind me on DKP, the other mages behind the gnome on DKP. But if you were a hunter or a warrior, something like that, you had no chance, because that's not what dropped. So you had to hope for the warrior one specifically, not Conqueror, Vanquisher or Protector. So initially, as I say, you had this situation where it took a long time to gear up. Eventually, you would decide that the gear in later raids was worth doing. Maybe you do the earlier raids less, but there was still reason, for example, to keep running Molten Core when you were doing Blackwing Lair, and sometimes even running Molten Core while you were doing Anchorage. And what would also generally happen is you would get a range. Your people wouldn't gear up at the same time. You'd get some people in your guild, especially when we're using DKP systems, that would gear up a lot quicker than others, because they were always at the top of DKP. They'd always get that gear. I was one of them. But so when those people decided they didn't want that raid anymore, that was usually when they'd got the gear. And you notice in TBC, but you know, even in vanilla, all that would happen is people would be really excited to do Molten Core. They love to do Molten Core, love to do Molten Core, love to do Molten Core. All of a sudden they've got a load of really great gear from Molten Core, and they're eyeing the upgrades in Blackwing Lair. All of a sudden it's not Molten Core anymore. It's Molten Boar. Okay, then when they've got tired of Blackwing Lair, oh, it's Blackwing Fail. We're not doing that again, are we? And then, you know, and the next one, oh, Yawn Courage. And then Naxxramas became, well, Naxxramas, because there wasn't anything after Naxxramas, and actually not that many people finished it. But the point is that, you know, when people decided that they didn't want the gear anymore, they moved on. And this is also pertinent for the Titanforging thing. TBC shrunk down to 25 players for the raid. Still dropping roughly the same number of pieces of gear though, so it allowed you to gear up quicker. Tier tokens, which had actually come in halfway through with Anchorage really, became the norm, and also fewer bits. I mean, Anchorage had 5 bits, fair enough, but then in Nax there were like 9 bits with an 8 set bonus. But the norm became 5 pieces of tier with a 2 and a 4 set bonus. So you could more quickly get your tier. Also, they deliberately tried to restrict the number of other pieces. It's not just about the tier. There's other things as well. There's like necks, and there'd usually be lots of necks that could drop, and you wanted the particular one, and wrists, and the other things that weren't tier gear. They tried to shrink that down so that, you know, there wasn't as much to go around. The stats might not have been ideal for you, just like now, but there were only so many of them, so you just put up with what you could get. Whereas if there was a greater range on each loot table, then again, that would mean it would take you longer and longer to gear up. But, you know, and the same thing happened in terms of people being turned off doing the content as soon as they'd geared up. I remember in my guild, and from people I talked to, this was not a unique experience. As soon as we killed Kel'Thas, now you needed to get Kel'Thas and Vash before, to get yourself attuned to be able to do Mount Hydril. You had to kill the first boss in Mount Hydril to be able to go into Black Temple. There's all these attunements, then you couldn't just go into the new raid. I mean, Black Temple was out before people had even defeated, you know, Tempest Keep. So as soon as you did kill Kel'Thas, you were, because you'd done Vash before, you always do Vash before, you would be able to go into, well, first of all, Hydril and then Black Temple. And that's what people wanted to do, especially when there were 2 raids there. You didn't, people, after a couple of weeks of getting everyone attuned, they didn't want to go back to Tempest Keep. You know, they just said, oh, it's boring. Well, it wasn't boring 2 weeks ago before you got your best gear, was it? It's all of a sudden boring for some people because now they've got the gear that they wanted, sod everyone else. And people do have that attitude, and Blizzard will be aware of this. So running down the lines, there was various other innovations took place in raiding, but in terms of the looting, the next big one, I suppose, would come in MoP. Mr. Pandaria introduced the idea of a reroll. Okay, so the Lesser Charms of Fortune, I think they were called to begin with, where you have something, you can get 3 of these a week, except at the moment we can sometimes get more. And it gives you a reroll on a particular boss to give you another chance of loot that's for you personally. So that, again, although that was quite a small benefit, it adds up. It added up to the point where you could get BIS gear. So at the end of MoP, there was only actually 1 piece of gear I didn't get. Now, at that time, of course, Blizzard were very, very aware that people could gear up now more quickly. So they introduced, first of all, Thunderforge, then that became Warforge, and that's sort of what we call it now. The idea that you can get these pieces drop, but you could also get the same piece drop and it'd be like 5 or 6 item levels higher. So that meant that that extended the lifetime of the content, so people would want to run it again to get the best of the best gear. But then that wasn't quite enough. So then Warlords of Draenor rolled around, and they also sort of took away the guaranteed sockets and made sockets a proc as well. They also brought in tertiary stats. So now you could get a baseline piece of gear, or you could get it Warforged, or with a socket, or with a tertiary stat, and some of them are quite tasty, or with all 3 if you're really lucky. And again, this was all about extending the life that it took you to gear up. But I think in Warlords of Draenor, it probably didn't go far enough from Blizzard's point of view, because there comes a point at which you think to yourself, you know, a socket, it's nice, and Warforged, it's nice. You know that the chances of you getting 4 Warforged with socket and leech or speed or avoidance, whatever you want, is slim. It's not really worth chasing. So they needed to add in a system which is worth chasing, because they added another thing in WoD as well, just to make it worse. In that you could do missions to get a piece of raid gear as well. Send your champions off missions, and if LFR was your normal thing, you'd get a piece of LFR gear. If it looked like you were doing a decent amount of normal, it'd be normal gear, heroic gear, and mythic gear. And the system we still have now. So in terms of gearing now, in Legion, we've got the Mythic Plus dungeon system. We've got the weekly cash, which gives us a decent item level. Higher, typically, well, it is higher, regardless, than a baseline mythic raiding item. You've got not only the gear from the raids, which again is quicker to gear up with because we have tokens for that. Far smaller number of so there's very few choice in terms of necks, rings, and wrists and all that sort of stuff as well. And also, we've got the missions that we can do. Every couple of weeks, we get a mission to send our followers out, our champions, to get us another piece of raid gear as well. So they needed a system whereby you would extend the life of it. And we know we're not going to be satisfied with just, oh, it might Warforge or it might get a socket. So then they brought in Titanforging. And Blizzard did actually say that what they wanted of Titanforging was it gets you to feel that you can do what might be considered old content with a reasonable chance of getting an upgrade. That's their state today. And that is sort of what it does. Because Titanforge can work through multiple levels, it's not just whether it Warforges or not. It can Titanforge, but you can get Titanforge where it goes up 10 item levels, or you can get a Titanforge where it might go up 30 item levels, something like that, with obviously a much smaller chance the higher up it goes. You've always got a decent chance of some Titanforge gear. So you know there's a reasonable chance whenever you're farming content. I mean, I can farm Heroic, for example, and although I know there's not a reasonable chance of me getting an upgrade on any one time, I know that there is a chance, and if I were to do it each week, as I have done it, you know, from the first week it came out, even though I've been doing Mythic, there have been upgrades. If I do it all in all that time, there have been upgrades quite a few times in Heroic, and I'm not just talking about the first few weeks, when of course there would be upgrades from there. So that's why they've put Titanforging in. It's because over time and over time and over time, they've allowed us to be able to get so much gear in such a short time. And they know that we are gear focused as well, because as I say, they're talking about behaviours that people used to exhibit in vanilla and TBC. When as soon as people did, because at those times you could easily get BIS gear if you were in a good progress guild, and at that point it was amazing just how many people all of a sudden weren't keen on doing the raid, because that's all it was about, getting their gear from it. As soon as they couldn't get gear from it, not interested. So they know about that behaviour. So the solution to begin with, as I say, in particular in MoP, was, well, let's get it so that it's very difficult for you to get your BIS gear. But again, you get to a point where you think, if you don't think your chance of ever getting it is good, then that doesn't work either. You get to where you think it's good enough, and then you still get bored of the content. So now let's dangle the carrot a bit nearer to you. Let's give you that carrot a little bit nearer. It's still always a little bit out of reach, but you sort of feel you can go for it. So anyway, I hope you found it interesting. I'm just getting ready for the Tuesday talk. That's going to be on in a few hours from now. It's on every Tuesday from 7 PM UK time for a couple of hours. Check it out on Twitch. If you like the video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe especially, and share with other people who might also be interested. And until next time, I'll see you later.